Rain poured over cold asphalt, washing away blood. The drops fell in sheets, relentless and cold, turning the cracked pavement of the Rusty's Diner parking lot into a dark mirror that reflected nothing but violence. In the center of that mirror lay a boy, 17 years old, 93 pounds soaking wet. His face was a canvas of fresh bruises, split skin, and the kind of hollow-cheeked starvation that takes months to carve into a human being. Around him, the world had gone mad with sound. Hundreds of motorcycles. No, not hundreds. More than that. The thunder of their engines shook the ground like an earthquake, a sustained mechanical roar that drowned out even the storm. Headlights cut through the darkness in every direction, creating a wall of blinding white light that surrounded the parking lot, the diner, the entire block. They kept coming, pouring off the Interstate 5 exit ramp in an endless stream of chrome and steel and raw, brutal power. The boy didn't move. He couldn't. Every breath sent lightning bolts of agony through his shattered ribs. His vision swam in and out of focus, the edges going soft and gray. He could taste copper, blood, his own. The rain fell on his face, washing the red away only for fresh crimson to well up from the gash above his eyebrow. Through the haze of pain and hypothermia, he saw them dismounting. Giants wrapped in leather and denim. Men with faces like carved granite arms covered in ink that told stories of violence and brotherhood. They killed their engines almost simultaneously, and the sudden silence that followed was more terrifying than the roar had been. Then impossibly they began to bow their heads. Not toward the woman with the blonde hair standing beside the black Escalade, her left arm bleeding, but her right hand still gripping a small revolver. Toward him, the broken, shivering ghost of a boy lying in the rain. But that moment, that impossible moment, when the world stopped looking through him and finally saw him, that came later. 48 hours earlier, Cole Harlan was a ghost. To be homeless at 17 is to become a glitch in the fabric of reality. People's eyes slide right off you, refusing to register the dirty jacket, the unwashed hair, the smell of 3 days without a shower. You learn quickly that you exist in the margins, the spaces between the world that matters and the world that doesn't. The gap between a rusted dumpster and a brick wall. The corner booth of a 24-hour diner where the staff pretends not to notice you nursing a single cup of water for 6 hours. The shadowed doorways where the neon doesn't quite reach. Cole had been unseen for 14 months. 14 months since he ran from the state facility in Reno. 14 months since he decided that sleeping under overpasses and eating from trash cans was better than another foster home where the father's eyes lingered too long and the mother's hands were too quick with the belt. 14 months of learning that survival wasn't about comfort or safety. It was about becoming small, quiet, forgettable. Bakersfield, California in late November was a miserable place to be forgotten. The cold didn't just chill the skin, it sank deep, settling into the marrow of your bones and refusing to leave. The wind that blew in off Interstate 5 carried with it the promise of winter cutting through Cole's thin jacket like it wasn't even there. His current sanctuary was a narrow gap maybe 3 feet wide between an industrial dumpster and the back wall of Rusty's Diner. It wasn't much, but it blocked the wind, and twice a day when the kitchen staff changed shifts, the exhaust vent above his head would belch out a cloud of warm, grease-scented air that felt like a brief vacation to somewhere tropical. Cole would stand under that vent, eyes closed, letting the warmth wash over him for the precious few minutes it lasted. He had learned to time the shifts perfectly. 6 in the morning when the night cook left and the breakfast crew arrived. 6 in the evening when dinner service began. Those moments of warmth were the closest thing to comfort he'd known in over a year. The diner itself was a study in faded Americana. Neon signs that flickered more than they glowed, casting unstable shadows across the parking lot. Vinyl booths patched with duct tape in colors that didn't quite match. A jukebox that hadn't worked since the 90s, its chrome facade dulled by years of cigarette smoke and neglect. But it stayed open 24 hours and it sat right off the interstate, which meant a steady stream of long-haul truckers, insomniacs, and the kind of people who preferred to do their business in the dead of night. Specifically, it was known territory for the Hells Angels. Cole knew this because he spent his nights watching, observing, learning the rhythms of a world he'd never be part of. He knew the sound of their motorcycles, the heavy rumble of Harley-Davidson engines that announced their arrival like thunder before a storm. Each bike had its own voice, its own particular note in the symphony of mechanical power. The low growling bass of the big touring bikes, the sharper, more aggressive snarl of the choppers, the sustained roar when they arrived in groups' engines, sinking into a sound that felt less like noise and more like a force of nature. He knew the patches on their leather cuts, the intricate hierarchy spelled out in embroidered symbols and text. President, Vice President, Sergeant-at-Arms, Secretary, Treasurer, Road Captain, each position carrying weight, respect, authority that needed no enforcement beyond its mere existence. He knew which ones tipped the waitresses well and which ones barely acknowledged the staff existed. He knew who drank coffee black and who ordered the chicken fried steak at 2 in the morning. He knew the rhythms of their meetings, the tension that preceded confrontations, the celebration that followed successful runs. Most importantly, he knew to keep his head down when they walked past. They were giants, these men, not just in size, though many of them stood well over 6 feet and carried the kind of bulk that came from years of hard living and harder fighting. They radiated something else, authority, the kind that didn't need to be spoken or enforced. It simply was. When they walked into a room, the room noticed. When they sat down, people gave them space. When they spoke, conversations around them lowered to whispers or stopped entirely. Cole wrapped his thin arms around his knees, trying to conserve what little body heat he had left. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and the damp from the earlier rain made everything worse. The moisture seeped through his jacket, through his jeans, through the worn-out sneakers that had holes in both soles. His feet were numb, had been numb for hours. His stomach cramped, a hollow, grinding ache that he'd learned to ignore. 3 days since his last real meal. 4 if you didn't count the half-eaten burger he'd pulled from the dumpster yesterday morning. It had been mostly eaten, but the bun was still relatively fresh, and he'd scraped off the parts that looked questionable and eaten the rest in 3 bites, standing in the alley watching for anyone who might chase him off. Hunger was a constant companion now. Not the sharp, demanding hunger of missing a single meal, but the deep, gnawing emptiness that came from weeks of inadequate nutrition. His body had started consuming itself months ago. Muscle mass gone, fat reserves depleted. Now it was eating whatever it could find just to keep his heart beating, his lungs working, his brain functioning at a bare minimum level. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep was a luxury reserved for people who felt safe. The nightmare found him anyway. It always started the same way. The apartment in Reno, small, cramped, smelling of cigarette smoke and desperation and something else, something darker, fear maybe, or inevitability. He was 10 years old again, small enough to hide in the space between the couch and the wall, small enough to make himself disappear when the yelling started. His mother, Claire, stood in the kitchen. She was pretty when she smiled, but she hadn't smiled in months. Not since Marcus came into their lives. Marcus filled doorways. His voice filled rooms. When he was angry, he filled the whole apartment with violence that pressed against the walls like a living thing. That night he was angry. Cole couldn't remember what started it. Maybe Claire had looked at another man. Maybe she'd forgotten to buy the right brand of beer. Maybe Marcus just needed an excuse, any excuse to remind her who was in control, to prove that he could take away her autonomy, her dignity, her very breath if he chose to. The slap echoed. Claire stumbled backward, her hand going to her face. She didn't cry out. She'd learned, like Cole had learned, that noise only made things worse. Screaming brought the neighbors, and the neighbors brought police, and police meant questions that Marcus would make her pay for later. Better to take it in silence. Better to survive the moment and hope tomorrow would be different. But this time something was different. This time Claire's eyes flickered to the knife block on the counter. This time desperation overrode fear. This time she reached. She never made it. Marcus moved faster than a man his size should have been able to move. His hands found her throat. They lifted her off the ground, her feet kicking uselessly, her fingers clawing at his wrists. Her nails drew blood-thin red lines across his skin, but he didn't flinch, didn't loosen his grip, just kept squeezing. Cole watched from his hiding place. He was too small, too weak, too scared to move. His body was frozen, locked in place by a terror so complete it was almost paralysis. His mind screamed at him to do something, anything, but his muscles wouldn't respond. He could only watch. He watched his mother's face turn red, then purple, watched her movements become slower, weaker, desperate, watched the light start to fade from her eyes, watched the moment when her body went from fighting to simply enduring to finally terribly going still. He watched. When Marcus finally let go, Claire's body hit the floor with a sound like a sack of wet cement. Marcus stood over her, breathing hard, his face flushed. Then he saw Cole. Their eyes met across the apartment. For one long moment, they stared at each other. A grown man who just killed a woman. A 10-year-old boy who just watched his mother die. Marcus ran. Cole crawled out from behind the couch. His legs shook so badly he could barely stand. He knelt beside his mother. Her eyes were still open, staring at nothing, staring through him like he wasn't even there. He put his small hands on her chest and pushed like he'd seen on TV, but nothing happened. He didn't know CPR. He didn't know anything except that she wasn't breathing and he couldn't fix it. He called 911. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely dial. The operator's voice was kind, patient, telling him help was on the way. But help was 10 minutes away, and his mother had been gone for 9. The paramedics arrived to find a 10-year-old boy covered in his mother's blood, holding her hand, telling her over and over that he was sorry. Sorry he was too small. Sorry he was too weak. Sorry he had been right there and done nothing when she needed him most. Cole's eyes snapped open, his heart hammering against his ribs. The nightmare left him gasping, covered in cold sweat despite the November chill. He pressed his forehead against his knees and waited for his breathing to slow, waited for his heart rate to return to something approaching normal, waited for the images to fade back into the dark corner of his mind where he tried to keep them locked away. 7 years. 7 years since that night, and the guilt hadn't faded even a little. If anything, it had grown stronger with time, sharper, more accusatory. He'd gone into the system after that. Foster care, a rotating cast of temporary families who didn't want him, in group homes where the strong preyed on the weak. He learned to fight in those places. Learned that being small meant you had to be fast, vicious, willing to go for the eyes and the throat because you would only get one chance. Learned that mercy was a luxury that got you beaten. Learned that trust was a lie people told to make you vulnerable. But mostly he learned to run. At 16, he ran from Reno and never looked back. At 17, he was still running. The only difference was that now he was running in place, trapped in the narrow space between a dumpster and a wall, watching the world go by through the gap. The parking lot was mostly empty tonight. A few big rigs idled in the back, their running lights creating small islands of red and amber in the darkness. The sound of their diesel engines provided a low, constant rumble that was almost comforting in its consistency. A couple of beat-up sedans sat near the front entrance. The dinner rush, such as it was, had ended hours ago. Now it was just the night owls, the insomniacs, the people running from something or towards something or just running. It was just past 2 in the morning when the black Escalade pulled in. Cole noticed it immediately, not because it was expensive, though it was, not because it was pristine, though, in a parking lot full of road-worn trucks and rust bucket cars. It stood out like a diamond in a junkyard. He noticed it because of the way it moved. Smooth, confident, no hesitation, parking directly under one of the functioning streetlights near the diner side entrance. Most people who came here this late parked in the shadows tried to be discreet. This vehicle announced itself. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. She was in her late 40s, Cole guessed. Blonde hair pulled back into a tight, practical ponytail. Black leather jacket over dark jeans and boots. She moved like someone who'd spent time in the military or law enforcement, her posture straight, her eyes sweeping the parking lot with the kind of casual awareness that became habit after years of living in dangerous places. This was Margaret Vaughn, though Cole didn't know her name yet. What he did notice was the small, discreet pin on her jacket lapel, red and white. The number 81, H and A were the eighth and first letters of the alphabet. 81 meant Hell's Angels, support gear. She wasn't just associated with the Hell's Angels, she was royalty. Maggie reached back into the Escalade and pulled out a heavy silver briefcase, the kind with reinforced corners and a combination lock, the kind that held something valuable. She closed the door with her hip, her other hand resting casually near the pocket of her jacket. Near Cole would realize later where she kept a compact revolver. She started walking toward the side entrance of the diner, her boots clicking against the wet pavement with a steady, unhurried rhythm. That's when Cole saw the Charger. It rolled into the parking lot from the access road with its headlights off, moving like a predator. Dark gray, maybe black in the poor light. Tinted windows so dark they were probably illegal. It didn't drive like a car looking for a parking spot. It drove with purpose, with intent, with a kind of precision that came from planning and practice. Every survival instinct Cole had developed over 14 months on the street started screaming. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. His heart rate spiked. His breathing quickened. His body was preparing for fight or flight before his conscious mind had fully processed the threat. This was what kept you alive on the streets. The ability to sense danger before it manifested. The instinct that told you when to run. The Charger glided to a halt about 40 feet from the Escalade, positioning itself to block the exit. The engine cut off. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched. Then both front doors opened simultaneously and two men stepped out. They wore dark raincoats, despite the fact that the earlier drizzle had stopped. Baseball caps pulled low over their faces. They didn't look toward the brightly lit windows of the diner. They didn't look at each other. They moved with the kind of synchronized precision that only came from practice, from planning, from having done this before. They moved directly toward Maggie. She turned the briefcase in her left hand. She saw them instantly, and Cole watched her body language shift in real time. The casual awareness became sharp focus. The relaxed stride became a tactical stance. Her right hand dropped smoothly toward her jacket pocket. Her face, which had been relaxed, hardened into something cold and ready. She wasn't a civilian caught off guard. She was a woman who lived in a world where violence was always a possibility, and she'd been expecting it. Maybe not tonight, maybe not here, but somewhere sometime she'd known this confrontation was coming, but she was still outmatched. The man on the right raised his hand. Even from 40 feet away, Cole could see the dull matte black finish of the handgun. The long cylindrical suppressor attached to the barrel meant one thing. This wasn't a robbery. This was an execution. Cole's body locked up. Every muscle froze. His heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his throat, taste it on his tongue. The rational part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive for 14 months, started listing all the reasons he should stay exactly where he was. He was 93 pounds of skin and bone. He had no weapon. He had no training beyond street fights with other desperate kids. These were professional killers. They had guns. They had CG. They had every advantage. If he interfered, he would die. The smart play was to press himself deeper into the shadows, close his eyes, cover his ears, and wait for it to be over. Wait for them to kill her, take the briefcase, and leave. Then he could slip away in the confusion. Find a new spot. Survive another day. The smart play was to stay hidden, but Cole couldn't look away. He watched the shooter plant his feet, both hands on the weapon, now adopting a textbook shooting stance. Professional, practiced. This wasn't his first time. He watched Maggie's hand come out of her pocket with a small revolver, watched her try to bring it up, knowing even as she moved that she was a fraction of a second too slow. He watched the shooter's finger begin to tighten on the trigger. And in that moment, Cole's mind wasn't in the parking lot at all. He was back in the apartment in Reno, 10 years old, hiding behind the couch, watching his mother's feet kick and then go still, watching Marcus's hands around her throat, being too small, too weak, too scared to do anything but watch her die. His mother's eyes going dark, Maggie's eyes sharp and defiant, staring down the barrel of a gun. The same eyes, the same moment, the same choice. Hide and live, act and probably die. But this time, Cole wasn't 10 years old. This time, he wasn't going to watch. His hand closed around something cold and solid lying in the weeds beside the dumpster. A tire iron. 2 feet of solid steel, forgotten and rusted but heavy. Real. It had probably fallen off a truck months ago, maybe years ago, and had been slowly getting buried in weeds and debris ever since. Now it was exactly what Cole needed. Before his conscious mind could veto the decision, Cole's body moved. He exploded out of the shadows in a dead sprint, his worn-out sneakers slapping against the wet pavement. He didn't yell. A yell would have given him away, would have given the shooter time to adjust to turn to put a bullet in him before he closed the distance. 30 feet, 20, 10. The shooter had his eye pressed to the sights, his entire focus narrowed down to the point where the bullet would enter Maggie's chest. Professional tunnel vision. Complete concentration on the target. He never saw the skeletal, dripping wet teenager hurtling out of the darkness like a missile. Cole swung the tire iron with every ounce of strength his emaciated body could generate. He wasn't aiming for the gun. Guns were small, easy to miss. A missed swing would mean death. He aimed for the arm, the extended right forearm holding the weapon steady, maximum target size, maximum chance of contact. The impact was catastrophic. The tire iron connected with the shooter's radius and ulna bones with a sound like a tree branch snapping. The crack echoed across the parking lot, sharp and final. The man's scream was immediate, high-pitched, shocked. His body knew it was broken before his brain processed the pain. The suppressed weapon discharged with a sharp metallic thwick, but the bullet, knocked wildly off course by the blow, missed Maggie's center mass and instead tore through the leather on her left shoulder, grazing flesh, but hitting nothing vital. A line of fire across her skin, painful but survivable. Maggie stumbled backward against her Escalade, gasping, the briefcase dropping from her hand and hitting the pavement with a heavy thud. Her right hand still held the revolver, and she was bringing it up, trying to acquire a target, trying to get control of the situation. The shooter's gun clattered to the ground, his right arm bending at a horrific, unnatural angle. He clutched it to his chest, his face contorted in agony, screaming words that Cole's adrenaline-soaked brain couldn't process. The world had narrowed to pure survival, pure action and reaction. The second man, the one who had been hanging back, moved with the speed of someone who'd spent years in violent situations. He lunged at Cole, closing the distance in 2 massive strides. He was huge, 6'2", easily 240 pounds of muscle and rage. His fist came around in a wide haymaker that caught Cole on the side of the head with the force of a sledgehammer. The world exploded into white light and ringing silence. Cole felt his feet leave the ground, felt himself flying backwards, suspended in air, for what felt like forever before his body crashed onto the unforgiving asphalt. His ribs, already bruised from sleeping on concrete for months, cracked under the impact. The air left his lungs in a violent rush. He skidded across the wet pavement, the tire iron spinning away into the darkness. He couldn't breathe. His lungs refused to work. His vision swam, cutting in and out like a broken television. Blood poured from a gash above his eyebrow, hot and thick, blinding his left eye. Through the haze, he heard the first shooter screaming, "Kill the kid, get the case." The second man reached inside his raincoat and pulled out a hunting knife. The blade caught the sickly yellow glow of the streetlight, at least 7 inches of serrated steel designed for one purpose: to cut, to kill. He stepped over his injured partner, advancing on Cole with slow, deliberate steps, taking his time, enjoying it. Cole tried to push himself up. His arms shook, his ribs screamed, his head felt like it was splitting in half. He managed to get to his hands and knees before his strength gave out and he collapsed back onto the pavement. The man with the knife loomed over him, blocking out the light. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in a warm bed years from now, not peacefully, but here in a parking lot, bleeding and broken, having saved a stranger's life for maybe 10 more seconds. At least Cole thought with the strange clarity that comes right before the end, at least this time he wasn't a ghost. Hey, the word cut through the storm like a whip crack. The man with the knife stopped, turned. Maggie was still leaning against her Escalade, blood seeping through the shoulder of her jacket, but she hadn't collapsed, hadn't run, hadn't done anything except level her compact revolver with a rock-steady hand, the barrel aimed directly at the second attacker's face. Her voice when she spoke was deadly calm. The voice of someone who'd been in situations like this before. Someone who knew exactly how far she was willing to go. You take one more step toward that boy, Maggie said, and I put a hollow point through your left eye. The man froze. His knife was still out, still ready, but he wasn't moving forward. He looked at the gun, looked at the woman holding it, looked at his partner who was on his knees, now cradling his shattered arm and making sounds no grown man should make. The element of surprise was gone. The simple hit had turned into a cluster, and now distantly, but growing closer, sirens wailed in the night. Maybe coincidence. Maybe a passing patrol car had heard the commotion. But the killers couldn't afford to find out. This ain't over, the second man spat. He grabbed his partner by the collar of his raincoat and started dragging him back toward the Charger. The shooter stumbled along, his face gray with shock, his ruined arm dangling. They scrambled into the car. The engine roared to life. Tires screamed against wet pavement as the Charger shot backward, executed a sloppy J-turn that left rubber on the asphalt and tore off into the night, disappearing down the access road. Silence fell over the parking lot. Cole lay on the asphalt, rain beginning to fall again in light, cold drops. He could feel his heartbeat everywhere. In his head, his ribs, his hands. Each pulse sent fresh waves of pain through his battered body. He tried to crawl, tried to drag himself back toward the shadows, back to the safety of the dumpster, back to being unseen where the cops wouldn't find him. Footsteps approached, soft, steady. Maggie knelt beside him on the wet ground, not caring that the water and motor oil were ruining her jeans. She gently placed a warm hand on Cole's cheek, stopping his desperate attempt to escape. "Don't move, sweetheart," she said softly. The hardness had vanished from her voice, replaced by something that sounded like the mother Cole barely remembered. "Don't move. You're hurt bad." "I have to go," Cole choked out, coughing. Blood mixed with rainwater in his mouth. "Cops. Can't do cops." "No cops," Maggie promised, her voice firm as iron. "I swear to you, but you need help." She pulled a sleek smartphone from her pocket with her uninjured hand, dialed, held it to her ear while keeping her eyes locked on Cole's face. "Victor," she said when the line connected. Her tone had changed again, urgent, commanding, but underneath it, Cole could hear the tremor of adrenaline starting to catch up with her. "It's me. I'm at Rusty's." A roar of voices on the other end, a man's voice deep and aggressive, demanding answers. "I'm hit," Maggie continued, cutting through the noise. "But I'm okay. It's a graze. They made a move for the case. 2 men in a gray Charger." She paused, listening. "Victor, shut up and listen to me." Silence on the other end. "I'm alive because of a kid. A homeless kid in the parking lot. He took out the shooter with a tire iron. The kid is hurt bad. Real bad." More silence. Then an explosion of questions. "Don't call an ambulance," Maggie said. Her voice had become absolute. The voice of someone who knew exactly what needed to happen and wouldn't accept any other outcome. "Bring Doc Merrick. Bring Wrench. Bring everyone. Someone knew exactly where I'd be tonight, Victor. Someone told them. We have a rat. She ended the call and looked back down at Cole. With her good arm, she shrugged off her thick leather jacket, wincing as the fabric pulled against her bleeding shoulder. She draped it over Cole's shivering body. The jacket was heavy, warm, smelling of worn leather and tobacco and something expensive. Perfume, maybe. It trapped what little heat his body had left. "What's your name, kid?" she asked, smoothing his wet hair away from the wound on his forehead. "Cole," he whispered. His eyes were so heavy, it would be so easy to just close them. To sleep. "Cole," she repeated like she was committing it to memory. "My name is Maggie, Margaret Vaughn. You just picked a fight with some very bad people, Cole. But you also just made the most powerful friends in this state." Her hand found his squeeze gently. "Hang on," she said. "Just hang on for me." Time became strange after that. Cole drifted in and out of consciousness like a boat caught in a riptide. He was vaguely aware of the cook from the diner, a heavy-set man in a white apron coming out with a first aid kit and a pile of clean towels. The cook pressed one towel against Maggie's shoulder and another against the gash on Cole's head, applying pressure that sent fresh bolts of agony through his skull. Maggie refused to leave Cole's side. She sat on the wet pavement, holding his hand, her voice a constant stream of encouragement. "Stay with me, Cole. Eyes open. That's it. Good. You're doing great. Help is coming. Just a little longer." Cole wanted to tell her that he was tired, that it hurt too much, that maybe it would be easier to just let go, but his mouth wouldn't work anymore. Words had become too heavy to lift. He thought he heard thunder in the distance, but it wasn't thunder. It started as a vibration in the earth itself, a low, deep rumble that you felt in your chest before your ears registered the sound. The vibration grew sustained, building into something massive, something that made the ground beneath Cole's broken body shake. Cole forced his eyes open. Headlights, dozens of them, then hundreds. They poured off the Interstate 5 exit ramp like a river of light flooding into the darkness. They filled the access roads, spilled into side streets, surrounded the diner from every direction. The sound grew louder, more intense, until it wasn't just sound anymore. It was a physical force. It wasn't just a few motorcycles. It was an armada. The unmistakable thunder of hundreds of V-twin engines drowned out everything. The storm, the distant sirens. The whole world became nothing but that sustained mechanical roar, a declaration of power, a statement of intent. They swarmed Rusty's diner parking lot like a tidal wave, chrome and steel and leather. They blocked entrances, shut down the street, formed an impenetrable perimeter that said clearer than words ever could that this place was now sovereign territory, that whatever laws governed the rest of Bakersfield no longer applied here. Cole tried to count them, gave up at 200. There had to be over 800 of them, maybe more. An entire army mobilized in the dead of night. The riders killed their engines almost simultaneously. The sudden silence that followed was more terrifying than the roar had been. It pressed down on the parking lot like a physical weight heavy with violence held barely in check. The kind of silence that came before wars started. At the center of the pack, a massive figure dismounted from a custom blacked-out road glide. Victor Ironside Vaughn was built like a freight train given human form. 6'4", at least 280, with shoulders that seemed too wide to fit through normal doorways. His arms were covered in tattoos that disappeared under the sleeves of his leather cut. His beard was thick and dark, shot through with gray. His eyes pale blue and cold as winter ice swept the parking lot until they locked onto the blood pooled under the streetlight. He wore the president's patch over his heart, the blazing Hell's Angels, death's head on his back. This was a man who could have anything he wanted simply by deciding to take it. A man who'd built an empire on loyalty and violence and an iron will that bent the world to his vision. He did not run. Men with that much power rarely need to. Victor walked through the parting sea of leather and chrome with heavy, deliberate steps. The hundreds of bikers standing perimeter behind him were dead silent, a terrifying stillness. that held the violent potential of a loaded bomb. They were waiting for one word, one gesture from their president to unleash hell on the entire city of Bakersfield. Maggie, Victor's voice was a low rumble that carried over the storm. He closed the final few yards, his massive hands reaching out. Maggie stood up, her face pale but her posture unbroken. She didn't fall into his arms weeping. She met his gaze squarely, and something passed between them. Understanding, relief, fury. "I'm fine, Victor," she said. Her voice was steady. "It's a graze, but we have a situation." Victor's eyes shifted from his wife's bleeding shoulder to the crumpled, skeletal figure on the ground wrapped in Maggie's oversized jacket. "This the kid. His name is Cole," Maggie said, her voice fierce with protective instinct. "Two hitters in a gray Charger tried to take my head off and grab the case. They had me dead to rights, Victor. Center mass. This boy, this starving, freezing boy, came out of nowhere and shattered the shooter's arm with a tire iron. He took a beating for it." Victor knelt beside Cole. Up close, the boy looked even worse. His face was a canvas of dark bruises and deep lacerations. His breathing was shallow and rattling. His lips had gone blue. Victor had seen hard men broken by less. For a street kid to step between a Hell's Angel's wife and a suppressed weapon took a kind of insane courage that money couldn't buy and fear couldn't manufacture. "Wrench!" Victor bellowed over his shoulder. A tall, wiry man with a graying beard and a heavy canvas duffel bag pushed his way through the crowd. Wrench moved with economy, no wasted motion, all business. Right behind him came Doc Merrick. Doc was 50, lean and weathered, with the kind of steady hands that only came from years of practice under pressure. He'd been a combat medic in Iraq, had sewn up wounds in firefights, had kept men alive when they had no business surviving. He didn't ask questions. He just dropped to his knees beside Cole, snapped on a pair of black nitrile gloves, and went to work. He flashed a penlight into Cole's eyes, checked his pulse at the throat and wrist, pressed gently on his ribs, and felt him flinch. "Pulse is weak, thready," Doc muttered, his voice clinical. "Pupils are sluggish. He's got a severe concussion, at least 2 cracked ribs, and he's suffering from acute hypothermia and malnutrition." He looked up at Victor. "His body is shutting down, boss. We need him in a warm, sterile environment 10 minutes ago." "Bring the chase van up," Victor ordered. His voice carried absolute authority. "Now!" The crowd parted again. A customized black Sprinter van rolled forward, its side door already sliding open to reveal a makeshift medical bay inside. Wrench and Doc worked together, carefully lifting Cole onto a collapsible stretcher. Cole's eyes fluttered open for a brief second, unfocused, glazed with pain and shock. He saw the towering, terrifying figure of Victor looming over him, backlit by hundreds of headlights. "You hold the line, Cole," Victor said, his deep voice unexpectedly gentle. "You fight to stay awake. You're under the wing now. Nobody touches you." They loaded Cole into the back of the van. Maggie climbed in right behind him, refusing to let Doc treat her gunshot wound until Cole was stabilized. She held his hand as Doc started an IV line, wrapped his ribs, cleaned, and bandaged the gash on his head. As the van sped off into the night, Victor stood in the parking lot and looked at the silver briefcase still lying on the wet pavement. He looked at the blood, the skid marks where the Charger had peeled out. His jaw tightened. He picked up the briefcase, turned to face his assembled army, and raised his voice. "Someone sold out my wife tonight," Victor said. His words carried to every ear, cold and final as a death sentence. "Someone told those hitters exactly when and where she'd be. Someone thought they could take what's ours and walk away breathing." He paused, let the weight of those words settle. "We're going to find them. We're going to find everyone involved. And we're going to teach this entire state what happens when you come for the family." 800 men roared their approval. Victor swung his leg over his road glide, fired the engine. The thunderous sound echoed off the brick walls of Rusty's diner. Behind him, 800 engines roared to life in unison. The ground shook as the massive convoy pulled out onto the wet streets of Bakersfield. riding three abreast, taking up entire lanes, forcing cars to pull over. They weren't just a motorcycle club anymore. They were an army marching to war, seeking blood for the woman who was nearly murdered, and justice for the forgotten boy who had saved her. 48 hours after the parking lot, Cole woke to the smell of coffee. Real coffee, not the burned bitter dregs from the bottom of a diner pot that someone had left out for 6 hours. This was rich and dark and spoke of mornings that didn't involve checking over your shoulder for cops or calculating how many hours until your next meal. For a long moment, Cole didn't open his eyes. He was afraid that if he did, the warmth would disappear. The softness beneath his body would turn back into concrete. The heavy blanket covering him would become the thin, stolen jacket he had wrapped around himself for 14 months. But the warmth didn't disappear. Slowly, cautiously, he let his eyes open. He was lying in a bed, not a cot, not a shelter bunk with springs that dug into your back. An actual bed with a thick mattress and clean cotton sheets and pillows that smelled like detergent instead of mildew and fear. The room around him was large with wood-paneled walls decorated with vintage motorcycle parts and framed photographs of men on bikes, arms around each other's shoulders, faces split with genuine smiles. Morning light filtered through heavy curtains, creating soft shadows that moved gently as the fabric shifted in the breeze from a heating vent. Heating. Warm air pumping into the room like it was the most normal thing in the world. Cole tried to sit up. His body immediately protested with a symphony of pain that made him gasp and fall back against the pillows. His ribs were wrapped in tight bandages that restricted his breathing. His head throbbed with each heartbeat. When he raised his hand to his face, he felt more bandages, the gauze covering the stitches that someone had put in the gash above his eyebrow. The memories came flooding back. The parking lot, the woman with the blonde hair, the gun with the suppressor, the tire iron in his hand, the impact, the fist connecting with his skull, the rain washing blood down his face. 800 motorcycles surrounding him like a mechanical hurricane. Panic seized his chest. Where was he? How long had he been here? Were the cops looking for him? Easy, kid. Take it slow. You're taped up like a mummy. Cole's head snapped toward the voice, sending fresh spikes of pain through his skull. Maggie sat in a leather armchair beside the bed. Her left arm was in a black sling, but otherwise she looked fresh, her hair washed and loose around her shoulders. She held a mug of coffee in her good hand, watching him with a warm smile that had nothing of the cold efficiency he'd seen in the parking lot. "Where am I?" Cole's voice came out as a rasp. His throat felt like he'd swallowed broken glass. "You're at the compound," Maggie said. She set down her coffee and reached for a glass of water with a straw, holding it to his lips. The Bakersfield Charter Clubhouse. Drink. Slowly. Cole drank. The water was cold and perfect, and he wanted to gulp it down, but Maggie pulled it away after a few sips. "Too much too fast, and you'll throw up," she said. "Doc's orders." "The men in the car," Cole said. "Did they—" The heavy oak door opened before he could finish. Victor Vaughn filled the doorway. In the parking lot, backlit by headlights and rain, he'd been an imposing figure. Here in the morning light in close quarters, he was overwhelming. 6'4" and broad across the shoulders, wearing jeans and a black t-shirt that showed arms covered in elaborate tattoos. His leather cut hung on a hook by the door, the president's patch visible even from across the room. But it was his eyes that held Cole's attention. Pale blue, sharp as broken glass, studying Cole with an intensity that felt like being x-rayed. Victor walked to the foot of the bed with slow, deliberate steps, crossed his massive arms, didn't smile. "The men in the car are no longer a concern," Victor said. His voice was a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere in his chest. "They belong to a crew out of Vegas. Small-time wannabes trying to muscle in on our territory. They won't be trying again." He paused, letting that sink in. "We also had a leak in our own house." Victor continued, his tone hardening. "A man I trusted for a decade sold my wife out to the highest bidder. Because of that betrayal, Maggie was supposed to die in that parking lot 2 nights ago. Victor's gaze locked onto Cole's and something shifted in those cold blue eyes. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of acknowledgement. The only reason I'm not burying my wife today is because a 17-year-old kid with nothing to his name decided to pick up a piece of scrap metal and go to war against professional killers. The silence that followed felt heavy. Cole didn't know what to say, didn't know if he was supposed to say anything. "Why'd you do it?" Victor asked suddenly. The question wasn't aggressive, it was genuine, like he really wanted to understand. "You could have stayed hidden, could have let it play out. Nobody would have blamed you. Why'd you step in?" Cole's throat tightened. The answer was there had always been there, burned into his brain since he was 10 years old. "I couldn't watch," he said quietly. "I couldn't just watch someone die when I could do something about it." Victor studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, like Cole had just passed some kind of test he didn't know he was taking. "In our world," Victor said, "loyalty and courage are the only currencies that matter. You don't wear the patch, Cole. You're too young and you haven't earned it. But as of 2 nights ago, you bled for it. You bled for my family." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, stepped around the bed and set it on the nightstand. It was a pin, red and white enamel, the number 81. "That's so people know you're protected," Victor said. "Anyone gives you trouble, they answer to me." Then he reached into his other pocket and pulled out a ring of keys, dropped them on the blanket covering Cole's legs with a soft jingle. "There's a garage apartment above our custom shop on the south side of town," Victor said. "One bedroom, bathroom, small kitchen. It's warm, it's stocked with food, and it's yours for as long as you want it." Cole stared at the keys like they were a live grenade. "When you're healed up," Victor continued, "you start working in the shop. We build custom bikes. You'll learn mechanics, fabrication, welding. You'll earn a wage, 15 an hour to start more when you prove yourself." He paused, making sure Cole was listening. "You are never sleeping on concrete again. You are under the protection of the Hells Angels. Any who looks at you wrong answers to me." Cole felt something hot building behind his eyes. Tears he hadn't cried in 7 years, suddenly there, threatening to spill over. "Why?" The word came out broken. "I'm nobody. I'm nothing." Victor's expression softened just slightly, the hard edges smoothed. "You stopped being nobody the second you picked up that tire iron," he said. "But here's the thing, kid. This isn't charity. This isn't a handout. You want to stay under this roof, you work. You earn your place. You prove you are not just some coward who got lucky." The softness disappeared. The test was coming. Cole could feel it. 2 weeks, Victor said. You working in the garage. You show up on time. You do what you're told. You don't complain. Don't slack off. Don't give me a reason to think you're just running to the next handout. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. At the end of 2 weeks, we'll talk about what comes next. But if you quit, if you run, if you prove to me that you're not worth the trouble, then you're on your own. We clear. Cole met his gaze, held it. We're clear. Victor nodded, straightened up. Good, rest today. Doc wants to check your ribs tomorrow, day after you start. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. And Cole, thank you for my wife. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Maggie reached over and squeezed Cole's hand. He likes you, she said, smiling. If he didn't, you wouldn't have gotten the speech. You would have gotten a handshake and a bus ticket. Cole looked down at the keys in his lap, at the small pin on the nightstand. For 14 months, he'd been overlooked, forgotten. Now he was being seen so hard it hurt. I don't know if I can do this, he whispered. Yes, you do, Maggie said gently. You already did the hard part. Everything else is just showing up. 3 days later, Cole stood in the garage at 7 in the morning, trying not to look as terrified as he felt. The shop was enormous. High ceilings crossed with steel beams, tool chests the size of refrigerators, Motorcycle frames in various states of assembly mounted on stands. The smell of motor oil and metal shavings and paint hung thick in the air. 6 men were already there, all wearing the Hell's Angels cut over their work clothes. They stopped what they were doing when Cole walked in, looked him up and down with expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical to openly hostile. A short, thick-built man with a bald head and a scar running through his left eyebrow stepped forward. "You the kid," Cole nodded. "I'm Wrench. I will run this shop. You do what I say when I say it exactly how I say it. You got questions you ask. You don't know something, you admit it. You fuck up, you own it. We clear." "Clear. Good." Wrench gestured to a workstation in the corner. "That's yours. Start by organizing those tool chests. Everything has a place. When you're done with that, sweep the floor. When you're done with that, come find me." It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't even interesting work. But it was work, and Cole threw himself into it like his life depended on it. Because it did. The days developed a rhythm. Up at 6, shower in the apartment above the shop, still marveling at hot water that didn't run out after 3 minutes. Breakfast, actual breakfast, eggs and toast and coffee. Walk downstairs to the shop at 7. Wrench put him on every grunt job in the book. Sweeping, organizing, cleaning parts and solvent until his hands were raw. Fetching tools, holding flashlights, standing for hours in uncomfortable positions while someone else did the real work. But Cole watched. He paid attention. He learned. He learned that Wrench was hard but fair, that his bark was worse than his bite, that he had 3 kids and a wife who packed him lunch every day. He learned that the tall, quiet guy named Axe could weld like an artist, creating perfect beads that looked like stacked coins. He learned that the youngest mechanic, a guy maybe 25 named Spokes, had grown up in the system just like Cole had been taken in by the club at 19, had built his entire life around this garage and these men. He learned that when you were a part of something, even the grunt work mattered. By the end of the first week, the hostility had faded. The men still didn't talk to him much, but they nodded when he walked in. They said please when asking him to grab something. They showed him how to properly clean an air filter, how to gap a spark plug, how to read a torque wrench. Small things. But to Cole, who'd spent 14 months being unseen, they felt like everything. On the 8th day, Wrench called him over to a partially disassembled engine. "Tell me what you see," Wrench said. Cole studied the engine, tried to remember everything he'd watched over the past week. "Valves are scored," he said slowly. "Piston rings look worn. Oil's dirty, probably hasn't been changed in a while." Wrench nodded. "What else?" Cole looked closer, noticed something odd about the cylinder head. "Crack in the head gasket." "Good eye." Wrench actually smiled. "This engine's toast. We're building a new one from scratch. You're going to help." Over the next 3 days, Cole learned more about engines than he thought possible. How the pieces fit together, how combustion worked, how everything had to be precise, clean, perfectly aligned, or the whole thing would shake itself apart. His hands, soft from months of not using them for anything productive, started to develop calluses. His back ached from bending over engines. His shoulders burned from holding heavy parts in place. He loved every second of it. On the 12th day, Victor walked into the shop unannounced. The atmosphere changed immediately. Everyone stood a little straighter, worked a little faster. The jokes and music that usually filled the space died away. Victor made his way through the shop, stopping at each workstation, checking progress, asking questions. He knew every bike, every custom job, every detail. This wasn't just his business, it was his kingdom, and he ruled it with absolute knowledge. He stopped at Cole's station. Cole was in the middle of rebuilding a carburetor under Wrench's supervision. His hands were covered in grease. He had a smudge of oil across his forehead where he'd wiped sweat away without thinking. "How's he doing?" Victor asked Wrench. "Kid's got hands," Wrench said. "Doesn't complain, shows up early, stays late, asks good questions." Victor looked at Cole. "You like the work?" "Yes, sir." You planning on sticking around? Cole met his gaze. Yes, sir. Victor nodded, started to walk away, then stopped, turned back. We're having church tonight, 8 o'clock. You should be there. It wasn't an invitation, it was an order. Church, Cole learned, was what the Angels called their formal club meetings. The meeting room was on the second floor of the clubhouse, accessed through heavy double doors carved with the club's Death's Head logo. Cole arrived at 7:45, nervous, still wearing his grease-stained work clothes because nobody had told him to change. Wrench grabbed him at the door. You don't talk unless you're asked a direct question, Wrench said quietly. You don't interrupt. You sit in the back. You listen. Understood. Understood. The room was arranged like a courtroom, a long table at the front where the officers sat, rows of chairs facing it. 30 or 40 men were already there, some wearing their cuts, some in regular clothes. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Victor sat at the center of the head table flanked by his officers. Maggie sat to his right, her arm out of the sling now. To his left sat a man Cole hadn't seen before. Older, maybe 45, with slicked back hair and a thin mustache. He wore the vice president patch. This was Dutch Kellerman. Victor called the meeting to order with a single knock of his gavel. We've got business to discuss, Victor said. His voice carried easily through the room, brooking no interruption. 2 nights ago, my wife was targeted by a Vegas crew trying to muscle in on our territory. The hit failed. The crew failed. But the hit was made possible by information that came from inside this club. The room went dead silent. We've spent the last 48 hours pulling phone records, tracking movements, following money, and we found our rat. Victor's gaze swept the room, stopped on Dutch. Stand up. Dutch stood slowly. His face was pale, but he kept his chin up, defiant. You sold out my wife, Victor said. His voice was flat, emotionless. Somehow that made it worse. You gave the Vegas crew her route, her timing, her drop location. You betrayed this club for $100,000 and the promise of a VP patch in their organization. Murmurs rippled through the room, angry, shocked. Dutch's jaw tightened. The club's gone soft. You're so busy playing legitimate businessmen that you forgot what we are. We're outlaws, Victor, not corporate suits. We're whatever I say we are, Victor said coldly, and you're done. He nodded to Wrench, who stood and walked to Dutch, pulled a knife from his belt. Cole tensed, but Wrench didn't go for Dutch's throat. He grabbed the vice president patch on Dutch's cut and sliced it off with one clean motion. Then the back patch, the club logo that said who Dutch was, who he'd been for 10 years. Gone in seconds. You're out, Victor said. Exiled. You've got 24 hours to be out of California. If I see you again, if any member sees you again, we won't be having a conversation. Dutch's face twisted with rage. You're making a mistake. The Vegas crew knows about the kid. They know he's a witness. They'll come for him. Let them come, Victor said. They'll find out what happens when you threaten his family. 2 members escorted Dutch out. The door closed behind them with a heavy thud. Victor turned his attention to Cole, still sitting in the back. Stand up, Cole. Cole stood. Every eye in the room turned to him. Most of you have heard the story by now, Victor said. This kid saved my wife's life. Took on armed professionals with nothing but a tire iron and more balls than sense. He could have stayed hidden, could have let it happen. But he didn't. Victor paused. He's under our protection now. Anyone got a problem with that? Silence. Good. Meeting adjourned. As the room cleared, Wrench grabbed Cole's shoulder. You did good keeping quiet, he said. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. But tomorrow never came. At 3 in the morning, Cole woke to the sound of breaking glass. His apartment was small. 1 bedroom, kitchenette, bathroom. The door at the bottom of the stairs led directly into the garage below. He had left it unlocked, figuring he was safe here, surrounded by the club's territory. He'd figured wrong. The sound came again. Louder. The crash of a window shattering. Heavy footsteps on the garage floor below. Cole's heart hammered. He rolled out of bed, grabbed his jeans, pulled them on in the dark. His ribs still ached, but the sharp pain had dulled to a persistent throb. He could hear voices now, low, angry, multiple men. He's got to be upstairs. Lights off, but the bed's made. Kick the door. Cole's mind raced. The apartment had two exits, the stairs down to the garage, which was now full of whoever had broken in, and a fire escape off the bedroom window that led to the roof. He grabbed his phone, texted Wrench, 911 shop. Then he heard the door at the bottom of the stairs splinter. Footsteps thundered up. 4 men, maybe 5, moving fast. Cole ran to the bedroom, slammed the door, shoved his dresser in front of it, grabbed the nearest heavy object, a cast iron skillet from the kitchenette. It wasn't much, but it was something. The bedroom door shook as someone threw their weight against it. Once, twice. "Come out, kid. We just want to talk." Cole didn't believe that for a second. He went to the window, pushed it open. The fire escape was there, rusted but solid. He could climb up to the roof, maybe hide, maybe. The bedroom door burst inward, the dresser sliding across the floor. 3 men poured in. Big, armed. One had a bat, one had a knife. The third, the biggest, had a gun. Cole recognized them, not their faces, but their type. Vegas crew, the same dead eyes as the men in the parking lot. "There you are," the one with the gun said. "You cost our boys a lot of trouble, kid. Cost them their freedom. Now you're going to pay for it." Cole's hands tightened on the skillet. His mind was a white-hot blank of pure adrenaline. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to be unseen. But he couldn't run. He was cornered, trapped. And for the first time in his life, he had something worth fighting for. A place. People who'd shown him kindness. A future that didn't involve sleeping on concrete. "I'm not going anywhere with you," Cole said. His voice shook but held. The man with the gun laughed. "That's not really your choice, kid." He raised the weapon. Cole threw the skillet. It caught the gunman square in the face with a solid thunk. He stumbled backward, gun firing wild, the bullet punching through the ceiling. Cole didn't wait. He dove through the bedroom doorway, rolled, came up running. The apartment was small. The garage was huge. He hit the stairs at a dead sprint, taking them 3 at a time, hearing the men behind him cursing, chasing. He burst into the garage and his mind went into overdrive, cataloging everything he'd learned in 2 weeks. Tools, workbenches, engines, bikes in various states of assembly, the hydraulic lift. Cole ran to the nearest bike, a chopper frame mounted on a workstand, grabbed a wrench from the tool chest. Not as good as a tire iron, but it would do. The men burst into the garage behind him. "Split up. Find him." Cole ducked behind a tool chest, breathing hard, trying to think. He was 1 against 4. He had a wrench. They had guns and knives and so on, but he had knowledge. 2 weeks of learning this garage, every tool, every workstation. He moved quickly, quietly to the hydraulic lift controls. The lift was currently raised, holding a Harley Road King 8 feet in the air for undercarriage work. One of the crew members moved underneath it, searching. Cole hit the emergency release. The lift dropped like a guillotine. 3,000 pounds of motorcycle and steel crashing down. The crew member saw it coming, tried to dive clear, but not fast enough. The bike caught his legs. His scream was immediate, high-pitched. "He's by the lift! Get him!" 2 more came around the corner. Cole grabbed a welding torch from the nearby station, fired it up. The blue flame roared to life, intense, deadly. He swung it in an arc. The men jerked back, not wanting to get close to 1,200 degrees of burning acetylene. "You little psycho!" One of them lunged with the knife. Cole dodged, felt the blade whistle past his ribs, close enough to tear his shirt. He brought the torch around, caught the man's arm. The smell of burning flesh and fabric filled the air. The man screamed, dropped the knife, but there were still 2 more, and Cole's luck was running out. The biggest one, the one who'd had the gun, came at him from the side. Cole didn't see him until it was too late. A fist like a sledgehammer caught him in the kidney. Cole went down hard, the torch slipping from his grip and clattering across the concrete. He tried to get up, got kicked in the ribs. The world exploded into white-hot pain. He rolled gasping, trying to protect his head. The gunman stood over him, raised the weapon. Should have stayed hidden, kid. Cole's hand closed around something on the floor. The knife, the one the other man had dropped. He didn't think, just moved. Brought the knife up in a vicious arc that caught the gunman's wrist. The gun went flying. Cole surged to his feet, knife in hand, facing down the three men still standing. His ribs screamed. His head pounded. Blood dripped from a reopened cut on his forehead. But he was still standing. "Come on!" he shouted. His voice didn't shake anymore. "Come on!" The gunman reached for a backup piece in his waistband. Cole launched himself forward. They went down together in a tangle of limbs. Cole's 14 months on the street, every fight, every desperate struggles to survive came flooding back. He went for the eyes, the throat, anything soft, anything that would make the bigger man let go. They rolled. Cole ended up on top, the knife still in his hand. He pressed it to the man's throat. One push, that's all it would take. One push and this man who had come to kill him would be gone. The man froze, stared up at Cole with wide eyes. "Do it," he whispered. "Come on, kid, do it. Prove you're one of us." Cole's hands shook. Every instinct screamed at him to press down, to end the threat, to make sure this man could never come after him again. But his mother's face flashed through his mind. Her kindness, her softness, the way she'd raised him to be better than the violence that had taken her. "I'm not like you," Cole said. He pulled the knife away, grabbed the gun the man had dropped instead, pointed it at him steady. "Get out, all of you. Get out and don't come back." The garage bay doors exploded inward. 30 motorcycles roared in headlights blinding. Angels poured off their bikes, weapons drawn, surrounding the Vegas crew in seconds. Wrench was first through, followed by Victor, followed by an army. They took in the scene. The man trapped under the hydraulic lift, the one clutching his burned arm. Cole standing over the biggest one, gun in hand, but pointed at the floor. Now his whole body shaking with adrenaline. Victor walked slowly to Cole, gently took the gun from his hand. "You okay?" Cole nodded, couldn't speak. Victor looked at the Vegas crew members. "Take them." Angels descended, zip-tying wrists, dragging the crew outside. Victor kept his eyes on Cole. "I saw the last 2 minutes," he said quietly. "Saw you with the knife at his throat. Saw you pull back." He put a heavy hand on Cole's shoulder. "That took more courage than using it would have. You could have killed him. Should have killed him by all rights. But you didn't. You chose mercy." He squeezed gently. "You're not just brave, kid. You're righteous. That's rarer than gold." Cole's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the concrete floor, all the adrenaline draining away at once, leaving him hollow. Wrench brought him water. Someone threw a blanket over his shoulders. Maggie appeared from somewhere, checked his ribs, his head, her hands gentle. "You did good," she kept saying. "You did so good." Victor crouched beside him. 2 weeks are up," he said. "I told you I'd test you. Didn't plan on it being like this, but life doesn't ask permission." He pulled something from his pocket, the same keys he'd given Cole 2 weeks ago. "The apartment's still yours. The job's still yours, for as long as you want them." Cole looked up at him. "I want them." Victor nodded, stood. "Then get some sleep. You start your real training tomorrow." As the Angels cleaned up the garage and hauled the Vegas crew away, Cole sat on the concrete and realized something. He wasn't unseen anymore. He'd been seen, tested, accepted. And for the first time in 7 years, he had a family. The days after the garage raid blurred together in a haze of healing and cautious optimism. Cole's ribs, which had just started to feel better, were bruised all over again. The doctors Doc Merrick brought in off the books and discreet wrapped them tight and told him to take it easy. He ignored them, Took it easy wasn't in his vocabulary anymore. Not when he had work to do, not when he had something to prove. The angels treated him differently now. Before, they'd been polite, professional, willing to teach him, but keeping him at arm's length, waiting to see if he'd stick around or run at the first sign of hardship. Now when he walked into the garage at 7 in the morning, someone always had coffee waiting. Wrench stopped giving him the grunt whir and started teaching him the real skills. How to diagnose problems by sound alone. How to tune a carburetor so smooth it purred like a cat. How to read the tension in a chain, the heat in a bearing, the health of an engine, just by listening to it breathe. Spokes, the young mechanic who'd come up through the system, started eating lunch with Cole. Told him stories about his own time in foster care, his own years on the street before the angels pulled him in. "You're one of us now," Spokes said one afternoon, wiping grease off his hands. "You might not wear the patch, but you bled for the family. That's what counts." Axe the Quiet Welder showed Cole how to create perfect beads, how to fuse metal so seamlessly you couldn't see the join. Taught him that welding was less about strength and more about patience, precision care. Even the older members, the ones who'd been with the club for decades and didn't warm up to anyone, easily started nodding to Cole in the halls, started using his name instead of calling him Kid. But it was Victor who changed the most. 3 weeks after the raid, Victor started showing up at the garage during Cole's lunch break. He'd pull up a stool, bring 2 sandwiches from the diner down the street, and they'd eat together in comfortable silence. At first, Cole didn't know what to make of it. Victor Vaughn was the president of the Bakersfield Charter, a man who commanded respect from hundreds of outlaws across the state. He didn't need to spend his lunch break sitting in a garage with a 17-year-old former homeless kid. But he kept showing up. On the fourth lunch, Victor finally spoke about more than just engines and work. "I had a son," he said quietly, staring at the half-eaten sandwich in his hands. "David, he'd be 24 now." Cole stopped chewing. Victor had never mentioned a son. "He was a good kid," Victor continued. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something raw. "Smart, funny, had his mother's eyes and my stubborn streak. He wanted to be a mechanic just like you. Spent every day after school in this garage learning, asking questions, driving the guys crazy." Victor paused, his jaw tightening. 5 years ago, he got caught in the crossfire. Wrong place, wrong time. A rival club thought they could send a message by hitting our territory. David was walking home from the shop. They didn't know he was my son. Probably wouldn't have cared if they did. The words hung in the air like smoke. They shot him 3 times. He died before the ambulance arrived. Cole's throat tightened. He didn't know what to say. Couldn't imagine the right words even existed. "I tell you this," Victor said, looking at Cole now with those pale blue eyes, "because you remind me of him. Same age, same fire, same loyalty. When I see you working in this garage, learning these skills, I see David. What he could have been. What he should have been." He set the sandwich down, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I know I can't replace him. I know you're not him. But having you here, watching you grow, teaching you the things I would have taught David, it helps. Makes the loss feel a little less heavy." Cole found his voice. "I'm sorry for your loss." Victor nodded. "Me too. But I'm grateful for you, for what you did for Maggie, for what you are becoming." He stood, clapped Cole on the shoulder, and walked away before the emotion could get any thicker. That night, Maggie came to Cole's apartment with dinner. Homemade lasagna still warm from the oven, with garlic bread and a salad that actually had vegetables Cole recognized. They ate at the small table in his kitchenette, and Maggie talked about her day, about the legitimate businesses the club was building, about the future she and Victor were trying to create. Then she told him about her brother. "Danny was 2 years younger than me," she said softly. "Sweet kid, sensitive. The kind of boy who cried at sad movies and rescued injured birds. Our parents were addicts. Mean ones. Danny took the worst of it because he couldn't hide his feelings like I could." She pushed food around her plate. "I got out at 18, got a scholarship, went to college, became a lawyer. I sent money home when I could, but I was trying to build my own life, trying to escape. Her voice cracked slightly. Danny ran away at 16. I didn't find out until weeks later. By then, he was already gone, living on the streets in San Francisco. I tried to find him, tried to bring him home, but he didn't want to be found. He was using by then. Heroin. He died of an overdose in an alley when he was 19. She looked at Cole with eyes that glistened but didn't spill over. I failed him. I got out, and I didn't look back hard enough. I let him slip through the cracks. When you saved my life in that parking lot when I saw you starving and scared and so alone, all I could think was that you were Danny's age, that you could have been him, that maybe if someone had reached out to my brother the way we're reaching out to you, he'd still be alive. She reached across the table and took Cole's hand. You're not a project to us, Cole. You're not charity. You're family, because we see in you what we lost, and we're not going to lose you too. Cole felt the tears finally break free. He'd held them for so long. 7 years of pain and loss and fear. 7 years of being overlooked and unwanted and utterly alone. Maggie stood, came around the table and pulled him into a hug. She held him while he cried, this woman who'd been a stranger 3 weeks ago and was now more of a mother than anyone had been since Claire died. It's okay, she whispered. You're safe now. You're home. 4 weeks after the raid on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, everything changed. Cole was working on a carburetor rebuild when Wrench called him over to the office. Victor wants you at Rusty's, Wrench said. Some kind of meeting with suppliers. He wants you there to learn the business side. Cole nodded, wiped his hands clean, and grabbed his jacket. The pin, the red and white 81, was fastened to the collar now. He wore it everywhere, a reminder that he belonged somewhere. He took one of the shop's spare bikes, a Road King that Wrench had been teaching him to ride. The trip to Rusty's Diner took 15 minutes, the same route Maggie had taken that fateful night. The parking lot looked different in daylight. No rain, no blood, just a normal truck stop with a few big rigs idling and a couple of cars parked near the entrance. Victor's Road Glide was there, parked under the same flickering streetlight where everything had gone down. Cole parked next to it and walked toward the diner's side entrance. He never made it inside. The crack of a gunshot split the air. Cole's body reacted before his brain caught up. He dropped rolled behind a parked truck, his heart hammering. Another shot, then another, coming from near the dumpster, the same dumpster where Cole had lived for 3 months. He peered around the truck's bumper and saw them. Victor was pinned down behind his bike, using it for cover. A man was advancing on him from the shadows, firing a handgun with methodical precision. Victor was returning fire with his own weapon, but he was outgunned and outpositioned. Cole recognized the shooter. He'd been one of the Vegas crew members from the garage raid. The leader. The one Cole had held at knife point. The one who should have been in custody. He'd escaped. And now he was here to finish what his crew had started. Victor's gun clicked empty. He ducked behind the bike, reaching for a spare magazine, but the shooter was already moving, closing the distance. "This is for my brothers," the man shouted, "for the crew you destroyed." He raised his weapon. Center mass, kill shot. Cole didn't have a gun, didn't have a tire iron, didn't have anything except his body and the choice to use it. He ran, sprinted across the parking lot, no plan, no strategy, just pure instinct driving him forward. The shooter saw him at the last second, started to turn, started to adjust his aim. Too late. Cole hit him like a linebacker, driving his shoulder into the man's ribs. They went down hard, the gun firing wild, the bullet punching through empty air where Victor's head had been a second before. They rolled. The shooter was bigger, stronger, trained. He brought his elbow around and caught Cole in the temple. Stars exploded across Cole's vision. A knee came up, driving into his already bruised ribs. He gasped the air, leaving his lungs. But he didn't let go. His hands found the gun, grabbed it, twisted. The shooter's finger was still on the trigger. It fired again, the report deafening this close, the muzzle flashed bright. Something punched Cole in the left shoulder. Not pain, not immediately, just impact, like being hit with a baseball bat. He looked down and saw red spreading across his shirt, bright and wet. He'd been shot. The realization was distant clinical. His body flooded with adrenaline, shutting down the pain receptors, focusing every resource on survival. The shooter tried to wrench the gun away. Cole held on. They struggled, the weapon between them, both hands fighting for control. Victor was moving now, running toward them, but he was 20 feet away. Too far. The gun was pointed at Cole's chest. The shooter's finger tightened on the trigger. Cole did the only thing he could think of. He headbutted the shooter as hard as he could. His forehead connected with the man's nose with a wet crunch. Blood exploded. The shooter's grip loosened for just a second. Cole ripped the gun away. Rolled. Came up on his knees. The shooter lunged at him one more time. Cole pulled the trigger. The shot was loud. Final. The shooter's body jerked backward and went still. Silence fell over the parking lot like a blanket. Cole knelt there, the gun still in his hands, staring at what he'd done. His shoulder was on fire now, the adrenaline starting to wear off, the pain flooding in. Blood ran down his arm, dripped from his fingertips onto the asphalt. Victor was there suddenly, kneeling beside him, prying the gun from his grip. Cole. Cole, look at me. Cole looked up. Victor's face was pale, his eyes wide. You're shot. How bad? I don't know, Cole said. His voice sounded far away. I don't know. Victor was already calling for help, pressing his hand against Cole's shoulder to slow the bleeding. Sirens wailed in the distance. Real ones this time, not coincidence. You saved my life, Victor said. His voice was thick. You took a bullet for me. Couldn't watch, Cole mumbled. The world was starting to tilt. Couldn't just watch you die. Victor's hand gripped his good shoulder. Hard. Anchoring. Stay with me, he said. Stay with me. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Then everything went dark. He woke up in a hospital room 3 days later. The first thing he saw was Victor slumped in a chair beside the bed asleep. He looked exhausted. His beard was unkempt, his clothes rumpled like he'd been wearing them for days. Cole tried to sit up. Pain lanced through his shoulder, sharp and immediate. He gasped. Victor's eyes snapped open. Don't move, he said, standing quickly, his hand gentle on Cole's good shoulder. Doctor said the bullet went clean through. No permanent damage. But you need to rest. How long? Cole's throat was dry, his voice a rasp. 3 days. You lost a lot of blood. They had to give you a transfusion. Victor grabbed a cup of water from the bedside table, held the straw to Cole's lips. Drink, slowly. Cole drank. The water was cool, perfect. When he'd had enough, Victor set the cup down and sat back in the chair. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Victor reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Legal-sized. Official-looking. He set it on Cole's lap. What is this? Cole asked. Open it. Cole did his good hand clumsy. Inside were papers, legal documents with official seals and signatures. Adoption papers. His brain struggled to process what he was seeing. His name, Cole Harlan, and below it a line for a new name, Cole Vaughn. I talked to Maggie, Victor said quietly, about what we wanted. What we've wanted since the night you saved her. We don't have kids anymore. Haven't since David died. And you don't have family. Haven't since your mother. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. This isn't a handout. This isn't charity. This is us asking you to be our son. Legally, permanently, to take our name, join our family, let us give you what you should have had all along. Cole stared at the papers. His eyes were burning again. I know you've got trust issues, Victor continued. I know every adult in your life has failed you. I know you're used to being alone, to not depending on anyone. But Cole, we're not like them. We don't give up on family. Ever. His voice was steady, but underneath it, Cole could hear the emotion. I lost my son. You lost your mother. We can't bring them back, but we can choose to be family for each other. If you'll have us. Cole's hands shook as he held the papers. 7 years. 7 years of being forgotten, unwanted, utterly alone. 7 years of survival with no one to fall back on, no one to trust, no safety net except his own wits and willingness to run. Every instinct he developed screamed at him that this was too good to be true, that if he let himself believe, let himself trust, it would all be ripped away. But he looked at Victor's face, saw the hope there, the fear, the genuine desire to make this real. He thought about Maggie holding him while he cried, telling him he was family. He thought about the garage, the men who taught him skills and treated him with respect. He thought about belonging somewhere, being someone's son, having a home that couldn't be taken away by a landlord or a cop or bad luck. Why? The word came out broken. Why do you want me? Victor's eyes glistened. Because you're brave, because you're loyal, because when death came for my wife, you stood up and fought back. Because when you had a knife at a man's throat, that you chose mercy. Because everything about you reminds me of the son I lost and the man I wish I could have watched him become. He reached out, took Cole's hand. Because you're already our son in every way that matters. This just makes it official. Cole looked down at the papers, at the blank line waiting for his signature. He thought about his mother, Claire, what she would want for him. Not survival, not just getting by, but happiness, safety, love. She'd want him to have a family. He picked up the pen Victor offered. His hand hovered over the signature line. I'm scared, he admitted. What if I mess this up? What if I'm not good enough? You're already good enough, Victor said firmly. You've always been good enough. You just couldn't see it because nobody ever told you. But I'm telling you now, you're good enough. You're wanted. You're loved. Cole's hand steadied. He signed his name, Cole Vaughn. Victor's breath hitched. He took the papers, looked at the signature, then set them carefully aside. He stood, leaned over the bed, and pulled Cole into a careful hug, mindful of the injured shoulder. Welcome to the family, son, he whispered. Cole hugged him back with his good arm and let himself cry. 6 weeks later, Cole stood on a second-floor balcony of the clubhouse and looked out over the courtyard, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The courtyard was packed, not just packed, overflowing. Motorcycles filled every available space parked in perfect, gleaming rows. 1,200 of them according to Wrench, who had been keeping count. Hells Angels from 8 different states. Oakland, Fresno, San Bernardino, Sacramento, Monterey, Reno, San Diego, Las Vegas. An army. They'd come for him. Cole still couldn't quite wrap his mind around it. Victor stood to his left, wearing his full presidential regalia. Maggie stood to his right, her hand warm in his. His shoulder was healed now, the scar a permanent reminder of the day he'd saved his father's life. His father. The words still felt strange, wonderful, terrifying. Below the courtyard fell silent. 1,200 hardened outlaws, men who'd seen violence and lived through wars and built empires on loyalty and blood, and all looking up at the balcony. Wrench stood at the front of the crowd. He looked up at Cole, their eyes meeting across the distance. Then Wrench raised his fist in the air. He didn't cheer, didn't shout. He reached down and cranked the throttle of his Harley. The engine exploded with a deafening roar. A second later, the man next to him did the same. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the air was consumed by thunder. 1,200 V-twin engines revving to red line in perfect synchronization. The sound was so massive it stopped being sound and became something physical. A pressure wave that slammed into Cole's chest, vibrated through his bones, resonated in his healed ribs, in his scarred shoulder, in the very core of who he was. The ground shook. The building shook. The whole world seemed to shake with the force of it. Cole stood there flanked by his parents, looking out over an army of outlaws who'd come from across the state to pay respect, to acknowledge him, to say louder than words ever could that he belonged. Tears streamed down his face, and he didn't care who saw them. Victor's arm came around his shoulder, solid and steady. You good, Victor asked, his voice barely audible over the roar. Cole nodded, couldn't speak. This is for you, Victor said, leaning close so Cole could hear. Every one of them is here because they heard what you did, how you saved Maggie, how you fought the Vegas crew, how you took a bullet for me. They're here to tell you that you're one of us, that you matter. Maggie squeezed his hand. You're not a ghost anymore, she said. You're seen, you're known, you're loved. The engines roared on a mechanical symphony of respect and brotherhood that seemed like it would never end. Cole looked out over the sea of leather and chrome and realized something. 14 months ago, he'd been nobody, a boy people looked through like he wasn't there. He'd survived by being small, quiet, forgettable. Then one night he had made a choice. He'd chosen to be seen, to act instead of hide, to stand up when every instinct told him to stay down. That choice had led him here, to this balcony, to this family, to this moment. He'd spent 7 years being forgotten. 7 years convinced he was nobody, nothing worth less than the dirt people stepped over on their way to somewhere important. But standing here now, feeling the vibrations of 1,200 engines in his chest, surrounded by people who'd chosen him, Cole finally understood the truth. He'd never been nothing. He'd been waiting for the moment when he'd be brave enough to be seen, waiting for people who would look at him and see not a ghost but a son, a brother, a fighter, waiting for home. The engines began to quiet one by one until the courtyard fell silent again. Wrench looked up at the balcony and nodded once, a simple gesture that said everything. Welcome home, kid. Cole nodded back. 2 years later, Cole Vaughn stood in the garage at 6 in the morning, waiting for his students to arrive. He was 19 now, no longer the skeletal, terrified kid who'd hidden behind a dumpster. He'd put on 40 pounds of muscle from regular meals and hard work. His face had lost its hollow, desperate look. His hands were calloused and confident. He was the garage's lead mechanic, now overseeing a team of 6. He attended community college 3 nights a week, studying mechanical engineering. He had plans, dreams, a future that stretched out before him like an open road. But more than any of that, he had purpose. 3 teenagers shuffled into the garage looking around nervously. 2 boys and a girl, all between 16 and 18, all homeless, all recruited through the Second Chance program that Cole had convinced Victor to start. They looked at Cole with the same wary eyes he'd once had, the same distrust, the same fear that this was too good to be true. Cole recognized that look, had worn it himself not long ago. Morning, he said, keeping his voice gentle. I'm Cole. This is my garage. For the next 6 months, it's your garage too. The kids didn't respond, just stood there waiting for the catch. Here's how this works, Cole continued. You show up every day. You work hard. You learn. In exchange, you get a paycheck, a place to sleep 3 meals a day, and skills that'll last you the rest of your life. No strings, no tricks, just work. The tallest boy, maybe 17, spoke up. Why? Why what? Why help us? Cole smiled, pulled out his wallet, and showed them the ID card inside. Cole Vaughn, not Harlan, Vaughn. 2 years ago, I was you, homeless, hungry, forgotten. Then someone gave me a chance. Didn't ask for anything except that I show up and try. That chance changed my life. He looked each of them in the eye. Now it's my turn to give someone else that same chance. You and Hen. The 3 kids looked at each other. The girl nodded first, then the boys. We're in. Good, Cole said. Let's get started. As he led them to their workstations, explaining tools and safety protocols, the garage door opened. Victor walked in carrying a toddler on his hip. David Cole Vaughn, 18 months old, named for the son Victor had lost in the boy who'd brought him back to life. The baby reached for Cole, babbling. Cole took him, balanced him easily with one arm, while pointing out engine parts to his students with the other. Victor watched them, his face soft with something that looked like peace. You're good at this, Victor said quietly. Learned it from the best, Cole replied. Later, after the students had left and the garage had quieted, Cole stood in the doorway and looked out at the compound. The bikes, the buildings, the family he'd found. A new kid arrived tomorrow, 15 years old. Girl named Sarah pulled out of a bad situation in Fresno. She'd have Cole's old apartment above the garage. She'd learn the same skills, get the same chance. The cycle would continue. Cole thought about his mother, about Claire who'd loved him fiercely but hadn't been able to save him from the violence that took her. He thought about what she'd want for him, not just survival, but this, purpose, family, the ability to help others the way he had been helped. He thought about the boy he'd been, overlooked, alone, convinced he didn't matter. And he thought about the man he'd become, seen, known, loved, home. Somewhere behind him, an engine roared to life. Victor heading out for a ride. The sound that had once terrified Cole now felt like a heartbeat, the rhythm of his family, his life. Cole smiled, closed the garage door, and went upstairs to his apartment. Tomorrow he'd teach Sarah what it meant to be seen. Tomorrow he'd pass on the gift that had been given to him. Tomorrow another forgotten kid would start learning that courage was the bridge between hiding and home. But tonight, Cole Vaughn slept soundly in his bed, surrounded by warmth and safety, and the quiet knowledge that he was exactly where he belonged.